Well, over 20 years ago, I got the gig drumming for one of my music idols, Robert Plant. At the time when I got the gig, I had a brand new Yamaha stage custom kit. I was a big fan of drummers like Vinnie Colaiuta and Dave Weckl. I couldn't afford to buy a top-end Yamaha, so I'd gone for a mid-range Yamaha drum kit. And this had a very specific sound, or at least I tuned it like that so I could get that sort of very cutting, biting, trendy sort of jazz fusion sound, or clicky bass drums and pinky ponky toms. Getting the gig with Robert, I realised that this was not the right sounding drum kit for what Robert wanted. So I went to Robert and said, I don't think my kit's right, you know, have you got any ideas? And he said, oh, I've got an old Ludwig kit that you could borrow. And so we went and pulled out this kit. It was a 1968 Ludwig. The hardware's pretty beaten up, but it had a nice sound. And for the first few gigs, I was playing this drum kit. Kits of that age aren't sturdy like the drum kits are now. And so I went back to Rob and I said, look, you know, this kit, it's pretty old, and you know, Ludwig kit of that era is going to be, you know, have some worth. Have you got any drum cases for it? Because at the moment I've just got it stuck in the back of my car. You know, I was just putting in the drums raw. You know, and as they move around, they could scratch and all that type of stuff. And I didn't want to scratch this kit because it was very old and pretty kit. So I said to Robert, you know, have you got any cases for it? He went, yeah, I think I've got some cases. And we went to dig out the cases. So I was going through one of Robert's many sort of storage rooms with all this stuff in, old projectors from when live he would have had to project, you know, film onto the back of the stage, you know, old stage clothes, you know, all sorts of old things, you know, mic stands, all this type of stuff. And eventually he finds these cases and he pulls the cases out. And these drum cases are very old, same era as the kit, and on them it says John Bonham, Led Zeppelin. I'm a drummer, and that has a certain effect on you. As he passed them to me over his shoulder and I looked at them and held them, I had a feeling, right? A feeling that was quite, it's very hard to describe what that feeling is. Partly historic, respect for history, almost like a religious feeling, that you're dealing with something which is sacred, almost. So I said to Robert, you know, in sort of a mumbly tone, oh, are these John Bonham's drum cases? And he said, well, yeah, because that's John Bonham's drum kit. And at that point, I realised this drum kit I'd had in the back of my car and that I'd been, you know, pulling around to various pubs and had been played by John Bonham. It was in fact one of the first Ludwig kits he had owned. Many years later, Robert rang me up and he asked me to come over and sort that drum kit out. So I did, and I, you know, got the hardware sorted out, and then you know, we sent it off to one of a drum tech called Yard, who's one of the great drum techs in the world, and he got the kit all spick and span, which was right to do for the kit. And you maybe seen a photograph of that drum kit when it was all nice and lovely, and maybe a photograph, if I can find it, of me with the kit. Once it had finished, we changed all the drum heads on it. And Robert said, well, you can have the old drum heads, you know, thinking, well, you know, it's like if my students seen some drum heads, that would be pretty cool. So, and I've grabbed one, but I've given them away. I've only got one left, and it's about the one I'm about to show you. So this drum head is off John Bonham's drum kit. Now, if we zoom in here and you look at the logo, all right, that logo is pretty old. I don't know when this was put on, but that does not look like a modern Ludwig drum head. And I'm sure with all the people watching this channel are going to probably tell me, oh no, it couldn't have been on that drum kit in 1969. It's far too young. And maybe it wasn't. But you never know. This might have been struck by the man. And some of those dents in that drum head might be the dents from John Bonham himself, the greatest rock drummer that ever lived. Or maybe not. Who knows? This got me thinking about the nature of rock and roll, the nature of jazz, the way things pass from modern culture, you know, the things that the kids like, that the grown-ups don't like, you know, this flim-flam thing, and then it achieves some sort of status as these people grow up, and it moves from sort of flim-flam to history, and then from history it moves into sort of mythic. There's a travel for almost everything. And talking about jazz, jazz is without doubt mythic. When we're talking about the origins of jazz, we have no idea really of these people, right? We can't find anybody alive now that even was in the same room as them. You know, the Buddy Boldens, the King Olivers, the Sidney Bechets, the Papa Jack Lanes, all these people that were there right at the beginning of jazz. Right, this is over 130 years ago. That has passed into myth. The history is gone. We can't touch it anymore. Whereas with rock music and jazz fusion and prog, the stuff that I grew up with, that era is moving from history to mythic. This week saw the death of two drummers, two fantastic drummers, and this video partially pays tribute to them. The first is Tootie Heath, Albert Tootie Heath, which is the last surviving member of the Heath brothers. All right, his big brother was Percy Heath, that came to fame in the Modern Jazz Quartet. Later on in the 70s, the Heath brothers actually formed a very funky jazz fusion funk band, and they're a great band. But of course, Albert Tootie Heath, he's one of those, he was 88 years old, nearly 90 years old, so he is the last of any drummer or musician that we could sort of touch or speak to that goes back to the bebop era, that played with the likes of Charlie Parker and those musicians, you know, in that era. That era is now moving to myth. You know, we have at the moment, I think Sonny Rollins is a little bit young from that bebop generation, but he is still there. Lou Donaldson is still alive. They're all in their 90s. The guy from, is it Patrick Allen from Sun Ra's band? Didn't expect to talk about this, didn't prepare. What I did want to talk about was the limits of what we could understand about these styles of music, and the limits of the music themselves. You know, that this stuff that starts off as teeny bopper sort of sensations, as frivolries. You know, these things that are here today, gone tomorrow. Most of it is just here today, gone tomorrow, and some of it isn't. Some of it sticks, doesn't it? I want to sort of step back and see if we could just see the bigger picture of what's going on. Now, what promoted this? Well, last week I did a couple of videos where I asked the question about, is it correct to call jazz music black music, which I object to on a number of different factual basis and ethical basis. So I have two reasons for saying I don't think we should do that. Now, of course, to me, this argument is incredibly nuanced. All right, and so I come at it by going, well, let's take the one position. We've got the established position, and the established position, without a doubt, and I'm not an idiot because I've read a million books on jazz history. You know, there's a billion people walking around that would say, we know who invented jazz, and people would say, well, black people invented jazz, right? Now, I don't want to make this video all about that. What I want to make the video about is the response. So I went, well, I don't think this is the case. I think it's more nuanced than that. And this is the whole point. It's all about nuance. It's all about nuance against black and white. And I don't mean that in a racial way. I mean that in terms of two positions that just can't be budged, that there's only two ways of seeing it. I think that art deals with nuance. That's what I think it does. I think people get locked into a sort of a binary, of one thing versus another, and we're really in that at the moment. And we need to find the middle path. I believe that the dialectic, which is you have the thesis, jazz is black music, and then the antithesis, jazz is not black music. And so I come steaming in with my video last week titled, I don't think, he didn't say it as a fact, he went, I don't think jazz is black music, or why I don't think jazz is black music. So here I am creating a video which is positing an idea. And then the discussion begins. Now in this case, it was quite a terrifying discussion. I was up all night trying to answer emails to try and argue my case. It went from people agreeing with me completely, from all different sort of racial and cultural backgrounds. That didn't seem to make a difference. Some people really agreed with me. A lot of people agreed with me actually, and I don't want to come across as a victim. But the few who didn't, many of them, put forward reasoned arguments and seemed to be friendly towards me at the end of those discussions. And I'm really, really grateful for those people, because it really pushed and put my ideas to the test. And then there were people that would just react at an almost guttural level. So it wasn't that they just didn't think it was true. It was that they were so disgusted by it that they felt that they could just throw insults at me. YouTube has a comment section which puts anything that it seems might be a bit dodgy, it doesn't publish, it pulls. And then there's one which is hidden, and you have to click on that, and then it opens up, and in there you see all the vitriol and bile against me. So I'm answering all these, I'm going through all these comments, and my friend comes on, and somebody on Facebook had said something marginally nasty about him, and he put a comment in, and because I was in this zone, this combative zone of having to deal with one insult, one accusation after the next, bang, 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 like this, I just fired back at him. And then somebody else messaged me about something completely inconsequential, something to do with, something they spotted, and I fired back at them, and then I suddenly went, oh, hang on. You've gone back into this combative approach, right? Now, I've thought about this a lot, and whilst that was going on, and I discussed this on the channel, don't want to get bogged down in this one, Electrical Martin Speak at Trinity Laban made similar comments pushing back against the dogma of race ideology, the dogmatic part of it. That's my opinion. Other people got very upset about it, and they started to call for his, sacking from the job. And I sat there going, oh my God, if what happens if I lose this channel? What happens if people decide to take me out for saying, well, then I said, but you haven't said anything wrong, have you? And then it comes down to something very, very frightening, but very interesting, is I actually don't know, right? I don't know whether I would get taken out, and because despite the fact that I believe I've said nothing wrong, or I have said something wrong and I don't realise it, so that means I should be taken out as well. Either of those don't seem a good enough reason for me to be taken out, which prompted my second video where I did the apology, and the apology was tongue-in-cheek, because a lot of my content, as you know, is humorous. You may have noticed that this video is not humorous whatsoever, and you may have noticed the look of this video is different and all that type of stuff, because my videos have more meaning than just what I'm saying, right? And videos relate to another video, and that got me thinking, is it possible on YouTube to have a nuanced argument? Is it possible to take a position, enter into a discussion, and then adjust your position? Is it possible for someone to come to the channel and see that you've said something, and then when they go back, see that you had a different opinion, and then enjoy going through what is, at the moment, 600 videos, it's probably going to end up at 1,000 videos, and enjoy the sort of almost endless journey through all these things that I've created year after year, finding out that my position changed, And the fact that my position changed, that I believe is there's something positive in all of this. Because there's a limit. There's a limit to what we can know. There's a limit to what we can say. There's a limit to how much we can be right. And there's a limit to how much we can be wrong. And when we look at jazz and we look at rock music, they are in two different places, right? At the moment, rock musicians, as I started, is in this sort of historic place, moving into myth, right? Jazz is in the mythical state, moving into legend, right? And the more we removed from it, if we're talking about a Mahatma Gandhi, that's historic, but it's slightly mythical. If we're talking about King Arthur, he's mythic but almost legendary. And if we go back to Moses, we are talking, legendary. We're talking, archetypal. And this is the thing, is that we removed from stuff. And I'm very aware of this. So I come up with this thing, say with the jazz argument, that I'm pretty confident that nobody knows how jazz started. Nobody knows for sure. The historians are dealing in a time which was not covered because of the racial bias at the time. All right? I know that. Right? So we're looking into a space which is unknown and trying to work out what was going on there. It seems pretty obvious with everything we do know that, to me, jazz was created through integration and through people working together. And that points to the whole of America. The United States of America, that is. The United States of America was built upon a constitution that enabled people to act reciprocally across racial and cultural divides, which you don't normally get. And of course, what happens in America, or the United States of America, becomes the most powerful, influential country in the history of mankind. And it does it in a matter of about 200 years, right? And so I'm pretty sure that jazz came up the same way. And so to focus it on it as being black music, is probably inaccurate, because unless it was 100%, and I think everyone was arguing with me, we're going, yeah, we know other people are involved, but it doesn't make a difference. It's still black music. And then I step back and go, well, why is it so important to racially delineate this music? What other music is described? What music's described as yellow music? Sounds racist before I start. Or red music. Native American, there's red music, or white. It just now I am coming at this. I promise you, I don't know. That's the thing you've got to understand. In my head, I don't think I know. I come in here and talk to the camera to find out what I know. Right, and the reason I'm so active on the comments is because the next ideas I have come from you guys watching it. I have evolved on this YouTube channel from a guy that sits there going through his 10 favourite, Weather Report albums, to bringing in an almost artistic approach to these things. I see these videos have been my creative output. I'm not going to say works of art, because I don't think they're works of art, but I think it's my creative output nonetheless. I enjoy that. I enjoy being able to play the game. There are videos on here where I've outright lied. There's videos on here where I get stuff wrong. Because everything's coming out of my head, and the nature of this, I get things wrong all the time. And I'm looking back on the videos. Oh God, I was watching one yesterday and no one had picked up on it, but I said something like, it was some artist that had been formed. It was Cream. And I said, when Cream formed in 1996, no one spotted it. And I watched it and go, oh God, how can you get that wrong? It's not that I don't know it. So you've got to understand, this is a certain thing. When you come to the channel, this is what I'm doing. I'm not going to change it because this is what it is, right? I'm not one of those people that goes and scripts what I'm going to do and does a whole ton of research. I don't want to be talking about this. What I want to talk about is the limits of rock and roll. I want to talk about the limits of jazz, the limits of what we can know about it, the limits of what we can say about it, and the limits of that genre in itself, right? That's what I want to talk about. And to see that because of the way it's happening, is that when we go back, if we're going back to talk about Eddie Cochran, that Eddie Cochran's is mythic. He died at 21 years old, 60 years ago, right? My father-in-law was friends with Eddie Cochran, and he was with Eddie Cochran half an hour before he died in that car crash with Gene Pitney. In fact, Gene Pitney very rudely... Gene Pitney, I've just done it there, Gene Vincent. Gene Pitney was somewhere else. He was 24 hours from Tulsa. And I promised I wouldn't make a stupid video with jokes in it, and now I'm cracking jokes. I can't help it. See, this is the thing. People can't help stuff. They are what they are. And my belief is it's best to just let people be what they are, right? And take it all with a pinch of salt and not get so worked up. Right, anyway. So Gene Vincent quite rudely came along and said to my father-in-law, Pete, he said, Pete, I'm in that taxi, find another one, and grabbed him out of the way and jumped in. Half an hour later he gets killed. So when my father-in-law was alive, I found this fascinating that he was friends with Gene Pitney and Eddie Cochran. And when he would talk to you, he would say, oh, I remember Eddie saying this, he said, Pete, when I get back to the States, I'll get you a pair of American jeans. And you know when he's telling you that no one else has been told that. And you know you're suddenly getting a picture of Eddie Cochran, of what he was like and how he thought and how he operated. It's tiny, but it's real. It's like a real historic thing. It's like we can touch it. Now, 2 years ago, Pete died. My father-in-law died. And now that's gone. That's all gone. And so this is what's happening at the moment. Albert Tutty Heath has died. Another drummer has died. And these videos act as a bit of a memorial for those. And the other drummer is Keith LeBlanc, the drummer with Tackhead, who first came to fame working for Sugar Hill Records, working with Grandmaster Flash. He then moved on to work in the RNU sound system. He was a jazz drummer, a very capable jazz drummer, but also a drummer that was laying the groundworks for hip-hop and released, I believe, the first ever single made out of samples. I think that's the case with Keith LeBlanc. I couldn't believe he was dead. I looked up how old he was, and he was mid-70s, 76, 77. I imagine this guy to be about 48, right? I couldn't believe it, and I suddenly got, man, these people that were involved in the creation of hip-hop 40 years ago, they're dying. It is moving into myth. There will be people in 20 years' time on YouTube trying to work out what was going on. But it'll be different, won't there? Because we will all be here. All your comments will be here. And my opinions of what I grew up with, and the things I directly know, the things I can bring to it. For example, as we started off, John Bonham's drumhead. All right, I know that I have my own viewpoint on Led Zeppelin because I played for Robert Plant for a certain time, and I was very aware that I was very lucky to play with an artist probably only comparable with the Beatles in terms of their sort of mythic legacy. It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting how much we can say and how much we can't say. So let's talk about jazz to start off with. The very essence of what jazz went many years ago. Many years ago. That breeding ground for jazz, which was the clubs, where musicians would go and play all day and all night, they go to after-hours sessions, right? That was the thing that created jazz in the first place, in the various sporting houses of New Orleans at the turn of the century, and then in the clubs of Chicago and New York. By the time we got to the bebop era, there's another generation coming into those clubs. They've got their own clubs. But this music was made on the street. Incredibly able musicians, like genius musicians, and that's the mystery. Where does a Charlie Parker come from? Right, this isn't a guy that's gone to, music college. Miles Davis went to music college because he was far more privileged, and he got up and realised that he wasn't going to get what he wanted there. And why did he get up to stand up and walk out? Because the teachers said that you had to have suffered, black people have suffered and you have to suffer to play the blues. And he thought to himself, my dad's a dentist, my mum's a teacher, I've grown up in comfort, I've never suffered in my life and I don't intend to. And he got up and walked out. I love that story. So, at some point, we see the intellectualisation of jazz. And now jazz sort of becomes elite. The beboppers do that. The much more visceral, guttural, sexual end of jazz goes towards rhythm and blues, doesn't it? And that filters down into rock and roll and rock music and funk and soul. It jumps up with its other ancient brother that's holding hands with country music. And believe me, country music was as much made by black people as jazz was, right? And I would argue that jazz, I would be going, country music's not white music. Loads of black people involved in its creation, right? You only have to listen to if you go back and listen to Jimmy Rogers, he's singing a blues. it's all the same thing. And the more visceral, the more guttural, the more naughtier end of jazz, the honky end of jazz, the boisterous end of jazz. He went off and he found country music. Come on, let's do something more fun. It formed rock and roll. And jazz moved into the concert hall. It moved into the classical arena. This happened in the 1950s. All right. Musicians coming up hit the civil rights movements. They saw jazz as being an expression of that. This is the point where jazz musicians start to bring in the influences of Africa. It's undeniable that the art ensemble or Albert Ayler is influenced from Africa. They are going back and exploring the primal scream of their ancestors. That's what the music is. All right? That's what the music is. But I don't hear that in early Dixieland jazz. Okay? So, jazz then goes, it's intellectual, it's elite, and in the 60s it is, what's the word? It's progressive and revolutionary. That's the word I'm looking for. That's what jazz is. And then, what's really interesting, this second wave of swing comes in. In the 1930s, jazz got whiteified, right? And white artists came in, like Paul Whiteman, aptly named Paul Whiteman, and then eventually Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, the Dorsey brothers, Artie Shaw, and it became a massive popular form. Now, what's interesting is the same thing happens to jazz at that point. Free jazz, actually, in moving away from the chord changes, free jazz is able then to team up with rock music, right? In doing so, we start to get this explosion. You could see it in Cream, you could see it in Pink Floyd, you could see it in the Grateful Dead. All those bands at the sort of similar time improvising in a way which is like jazz improvisation, but doesn't have to follow the phrasing and harmonic limits of improvisation, jazz improvisation, the bebop improvisation. So free jazz plays a service to create an area of music that then moves forward, and suddenly you're into this second swinging age where jazz is suddenly selling lots and lots of records. We see the Mavish Junction, we see Weather Report. Now this is something really interesting here for me, is that if you take some of the sort of second wave fusion bands, if you take something like the Crusaders, and even more so Earth, Wind and Fire moved from being a heavy jazz fusion band, right, in the early 70s, are slowly getting more and more commercial, and then they get to this point where they're making these incredible pop and disco records. Now, I am a massive fan of Earth, Wind and Fire, and I'm going to do a video on them at some point. When I put them on, these records are as sophisticated. I would say they're even greater than the earlier jazz rock, jazz fusion albums. They don't compromise whatsoever. If you get the live album, which I think is called Gratitude, and listen to that, there's moments on that which is some of the heaviest jazz rock, jazz fusion, and I haven't even talked about them on this channel because Earth, Wind and Fire, or George Benson, or the Crusaders, they're the beginnings of laying the groundwork of Shaka Khan. It's of eventually Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson, who was produced by Quincy Jones, that goes right back to jazz. And the biggest pop music in the world, right, in the 1980s, the Whitney Houstons, the Michael Jacksons, the Princes, come straight out of jazz. All right, straight out of jazz. Now that's denied. That will be denied because the jazz world had split. It had happened before. The jazz world had split off, And it had become this rarefied thing. And by the 1980s, when Michael Jackson was the biggest thing in the world, you know, the Wynton Marsalises were painting the picture of, let's go back to and honour this very special form. And let's respect the form. I don't think Wynton was arguing for a black or white sort of delineation. But by the time you get to Nicholas Payton with his, you know, black American jazz, what we have is the idea that jazz is the elite black classical music of America and needs to be respected, because because it's respected, it needs to be looked after, and that pulls funding in. All right, and that's where we're at now. And the nuance here is trying to look at somebody like Thelonious Monk, right, who was banned from performing because he was sat in his car, even though he wasn't a druggie, with his mates smoking some drugs. The police stop him, and he, being an honourable person, takes the blame for that, and he cannot perform anymore because they take away. Same that they did to Billie Holiday. They tried to stick Billie Holiday. Lester Young was stuck in prison. Jackie McLean was stuck in prison. This was not the elite. This was not the elite. Jazz has created an elite. But rock and roll, this is what we all love. You know, I'm a big jazz fan. My dad brought me up on jazz. But the thing that was the antithesis of jazz to me was rock, heavy rock. It started off with Motorhead. It started off with Iron Maiden, right? And when I started to get into these bands and I was playing, I actually saw that there was a link. You know, there was a link between these different artists, you know, and these all existed in all music. And I start to pursue this thing, and then you go towards Led Zeppelin, you go towards Yes, Genesis, you go through all that. Right, when I was a kid, I can remember somebody had graffitied onto the wall downtown 2 words, Pink Floyd. And I used to go and tell my mum and dad, and I can remember saying to my dad, what's Pink Floyd? He goes, I don't know, I think it's he's a musician, I think he's like a bit of a druggie. Right, Pink Floyd were an alternative. Yeah, they were selling millions of records, but those records were only being bought by young people. This is the thing, is that we are now moving with rock music. There's a limit. There's a limit to what rock music can be or do. Now, the reason I'm saying all this, because I'm going to get to the end of the video, and this video is far more focused than one of my other videos, but I hope you've enjoyed the chat. But this week, what I'm about to do, and I haven't filmed them yet, is I am going to be I'm going to start off by creating what I think are the list of 10 overrated bands. And it's really going to upset people on this channel. I just know it is, right? Because they are not going to see this list in the nuance that is there. And that's why I'm sort of trying to lay the groundwork here. But it could well be this video does really well. Now, I know the game I'm in. I know I put clickbait titles up. When people come, this is the way YouTube works. You put a clickbait title, lots of people come, hopefully. When you get there, you deliver what they want. Now, a lot of people complain about me because I talk too much, because most people just want to hear what the 10 overrated bands are so they can see them and see if their favourite bands are in the list. If their favourite bands aren't in the list, then they're going to kick off. That's the only reason why they've come. And that brings a lot of people in, doesn't it? Right? And what happens is some of them who come along, when they see what I'm doing, they go, I actually quite like what this bloke's doing, and they stay. And that filter builds a community around me which I can do stuff with. I can do it personally and creatively, but also I can try and benefit the members of that community, which I'm trying my hardest to do. This is why I'm here doing this. And this video is a little bit of a sort of explanation. It's where we step back from the YouTube videos I use to see the bigger picture. That's what I'm doing here, especially after what's happened last week on the channel. So, where was I? I am going to do a list of the 10 most overrated bands. Now, some of these bands will be bands that nobody has ever heard of except for people really in the know, right? So they're unknown and they should be known. But some of these bands will be, these are underrated bands, because I'm going to do that as well. I haven't explained. So I'm going to do underrated and I'm going to do overrated. But on the underrated list, there is going to be a whole bunch of bands that are actually really famous, but I still don't think they're as famous as they should be. They've sort of been lost or forgotten as we see this idea of rock and roll moving into the mythic. Sorry. And so well, I'm also going to do 10 overrated bands. And when I was going through this list, it was quite interesting. Well, which ones am I going to pick? I think I'm going to go for. There's bands on there that I really, really respect, that I think are absolutely fantastic, that have made some of the greatest music in the history of rock and roll or rock music, but they have fallen down one side of the mythic division. So if you imagine this mythic thing that's coming up, it's coming up like this, and it's moving up through the music, and certain artists are falling down the one side and getting completely forgotten, and other artists are being pushed up to being so well respected that nobody can ever question them in any shape or form. Well, I am about to question them, and anyone who's been watching this channel knows some of the bands that are going to get it. And there's one particular band that's really going to get it full barrels, and I am doing a lot of research into that band, and I am getting more and more respect for that band, because that is the nature of this channel, right? I am exploring it, I'm thinking about that band, my mind's around it. I haven't thought them so much because they weren't like one of my favourite bands, but I'm aware of them. There's a whole host of bands like this. So part of it is that I am re-evaluating their legacy and going, that's really, really good. But also pointing out the limits of taking artists and pushing them up. You're right. Now I'm going to give you an example that I won't be discussing, so that will finish the video off. You'll get an idea of what I'm about to do. Right? If we take two incredibly important guitarists from the 1960s. One is Eric Clapton and one is Jimi Hendrix. And let's put them up against the third guitarist that we could add in from that London scene, which is Jeff Beck. In the early 70s, Jeff Beck was an instrumental guitar player. He hadn't been in a band like Cream that had sold 30, 40 million albums. He hadn't come out and written I Shot the Sheriff and got in the charts. And everyone knew Eric. Jeff Beck was people in the know knew about Jeff Beck. All the guitarists respected Jeff Beck. All right? Jimi Hendrix was the greatest guitarist that had ever lived. That was the sort of, story. All right? 50 years later, it's completely changed. Everybody thinks that Jeff Beck's the greatest. Right? Jeff Beck's iconicness as a guitar player, the haircut and the stance and all that, and him just being there, despite the fact that he's making esoteric jazz rock albums, he has enabled, and I don't know how, before he died he was able to play the Royal Albert Hall and come out and play like Mahavishnu, Billy Cobb tracks, when those bands could never have done that. His status has gone up, this stage is, and then he dies. And because he's so well respected, everybody comes out and goes, oh my God, Jeff Beck was amazing, we've lost. And he's now been elevated up. Whereas Jimi Hendrix, I feel, is dropping. Right, I meet young kids and they're into rock music, and they're into Led Zeppelin, and they're listening to Queen, and they're listening to these bands, and they know who Jeff Beck is. But Jimi Hendrix is not figuring anymore. Jimi Hendrix is dropping. And then Eric Clapton. Right, Eric Clapton, the first guy to play these long, overdriven, beautiful solos on the Beano album, and with Yardbirds. This is an incredibly important guitarist that then joined Cream, and Cream basically creates rock music. They create heavy riff soloing, lay the groundwork for jazz rock, jazz fusion, lay the groundwork for progressive rock. He's an incredible singer, and he has this illustrious career that goes right up to the 80s, and he's out there doing these huge gigs and all that type of stuff. Clapton's reputation has just dropped. You saw that in the Rolling Stone list. He's dropped right down, right? And the reason is because who was to know that there would be an ideology at this point, right, that you cannot question? Now, I have got no opinion on COVID and the vaccinations. I went and got the vaccination and all that type of stuff. And, but because he's come out and been outspoken against that, and who was to know that we were going to end up in a sort of cultural epoch which we're in now, which will look at Eric Clapton, look at his awful comments he said about race in the 1970s, put that with his protestations again, And I mean, I've met Eric Clapton. I spoke to him very briefly. He seemed like a very nice guy. I've watched interviews. He seems like a very nice guy. I'm the sort of person that doesn't, you know, someone can have the most worst opinions, but they're all right with me, and I think they're a nice person. That's the way I am. But I'm an older person, and that's how we operate. And you know, younger people are far more dogmatic. Well, are they? But the point is, we have a situation now where that upward movement has changed the sort of mythic statement, mythic status of these. So we would put Clapton at the bottom. We've got Hendrix. We've got Jeff Beck. Now I know a lot of people who watch this channel go, no, you can't say that about Hendrix. I know we all think Hendrix is the best, but you've got to talk to the kids. I talk to the kids. They don't know who he is. They don't get it. Right? When you play them, they don't understand it. They've grown up listening to, you know, Animals as Leaders and Polyphia and that type of guitar. They don't get Hendrix at all. You know, he's setting fire to his guitar. He's being lewd and doing all that bit. They just don't get it. But you know who's above them all, don't you? You know who's above them all. It's Brian May. Queen. Who'd have thought it? A Queen gonna make my overrated list? Yep. I love Queen. But this mythic thing has elevated Queen up. Right? I think it starts with Wayne's World. That scene in the car. Right? Not only did that start to bring in this "we're not worthy" thing. Now, I've said on this channel, I think that started with Live Aid. The we're not worthy. You know, the thing where someone like John Bonham, who, you know, 50 years ago was just a guy that lived round here. You could have gone down the local pub and gone up the road. I know exactly what pub he would have been in. You could have gone and walked in there, had a drink, gone up and said, "John, you want a drink?" And you could have had a drink with him. Right? He was just a regular guy. All the guys that I know of my generation above, they all knew John Bonham. And they all tell the stories. Oh, I remember John did this. I remember John did that. I was chatting to my mate Kevin Gammon the other day. And this will be the end story, because this is a killer story. My mate Kevin Gammon is my best friend. He's 20 years older than me, and he was the guitarist in the Band of Joy with Robert Plant and John Bonham in the early 60s. And they went down to London, they got a little bit of a deal, and they went down and recorded a whole bunch of records. John Bonham and Robert Plant. You can go and Google a Band of Joy, and you will hear Bonham and John playing all sorts of stuff, and you will hear little seeds of Led Zeppelin there. Anyway, he told me, and again, this is something that he told me. This is in the book, so I'm about to tell you something that isn't anywhere. It's not known anywhere, right? It's just not known. I'm about to tell you something directly from a guy that was there to me, right? And if this video gets watched lots, this story will now be going to the mythic world, maybe, or it might just disappear and it'll be forgotten forever. But I feel this story does give you an idea about John Bonham. This story gives you a little inkling into it. You know, the guy that may have hit this drum head, it gives you a bit of an idea of who he was. In 1968, he was 20 years old, right? And he comes out of the recording session. They walk down the road and they're by Ronnie Scott's, right? And who should come out wearing bright red trousers, looking actually quite psychedelic at the time, but the great Elvin Jones from John Coltrane's group. And Kevin and John Bonham looked in awe. And John Bonham wanted to go up and talk to Elvin Jones, but he didn't feel worthy. He was in awe of Elvin Jones. Right? He had the feeling towards Elvin Jones that we have towards John Bonham. The kids who are in awe of John Bonham don't know who Elvin Jones is, because he's passed into this legendary status now. He's in the background. He's gone off with Jimi Hendrix, you know. 20 years and no one will know who he is. Right? And John Bonham felt that he couldn't go up. This is the greatest drummer in the world. But of course he wasn't. He was just a drummer. And Elvin Jones was just a drummer. And I'm just a drummer. And we're just all people. That's all we are. Right? And it means nothing. Right? And it's just the ambivalent nonchalance of history to throw one thing up and for another thing to go away. Now, we may want to know who influenced John Bonham. What was his influences? Because he didn't do that many, I mean, obviously like Carmine Appice, we know, he must have listened to Ginger Baker, but I've just thrown something in the mix. He was an Elvin Jones fan. All right? You listen to Elvin Jones at the beginning of A Love Supreme, that Latin beat he does is absolutely incredible. I still can't play it. I just don't know what Elvin Jones is doing then when he does that. I've written it out and played it, but when I play it, it doesn't sound like Elvin Jones. I can't understand what he's doing, and also I can't get inside that beat. I don't know why. Elvin's got a certain way of playing. How much did that influence John Bonham? All right, that's what this channel's about. And fundamentally, we don't know. I don't know, and you don't know. And fundamentally, it has to be a discussion. And it has to be a discussion that is done in a friendly, listening, empathetic way. Because if it's not, there will be no conclusion. Now, for those of people who have complete opposite political viewpoints to me, who maybe disagreed with me saying jazz is black music, isn't black music, right? Of course you know that there's a big part of me that sees and acts and talks like, jazz is black music. And I will carry on. I think I may have done it on this video I think I did it when I was talking about rock and roll, but I know I'm going to do it. It's a way of seeing things that we are not going to break the habit of doing. But for those of you who argued with me, be aware that my position has tempered, right? And what I would say now, after having all the discussions, is yes, we know black people had the predominantly biggest influence in creating the music, and then we can argue it. And my point is that that's not enough to racially identify a music form. That's unethical. But what we do need to respect here, which perhaps I didn't, is the fact that what black Americans brought to it was the experience of the slave trade, of slavery and Jim Crow. They brought that into the music, and so the music has a profoundness. Now, I've come up with the argument that I would not have been able to argue with. If somebody had come on and said, look, Andy, you can say all this blah, 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 but there's something about black people that makes it unique, and that has to be identified in a certain way. And if the easiest way is just to call it black music, then that's what we have to do. And you have to sacrifice your want to be all sort of colourblind and all that type of stuff. Yeah. That is where we're at the moment. And at this point on this day, I have come across. I'm still talking. I'm still thinking these ideas, and I feel the more we talk about it, the more we'll move it. But I just hope those of you who did find what I was saying, oh my God, how can he say this? There's some of you might go, yeah, but there is a point. Yeah, I do see what he's saying, and actually, maybe it's racist to box this music off, which is obviously the music that was given to the world and that everybody was involved in. The black people were not in a position of power. All they could do was to be involved with stuff that was going on and get inside it, and from their position of weakness, all right? From their position of weakness at that time, to be able to then take that and with their ingenuity turn it into something profound. And that gets forgotten. That gets forgotten. When you start to say, jazz is black music, when you say jazz is African music, you forget that it's not. It's made out of Souther marches, it's made out of, European folk music, Irish and Celtic music, it's made out of, classical music, it's made out of all these different types of music. Right? That's what it is. And you deny that. Now the truth is, going back right to the beginning of this, why I did it, is those are the two viewpoints, right? And the thing is with the way we see the world, there's a whole bunch of things that are like magnets. It's really hard to get them to go together. You push them together, they jump apart, but they need to come together. It's part of humanity, that we reach out with one hand. We reach out. They're the progressive liberal types. We reach out for the thing that we see that looks wonderful, but with the other hand we protect ourselves from threat and conserve what we already know. Right, those two things are always in opposition. And when do you know when to do one and when to do the other? Well, it's negotiated. And you know, want to know where that's negotiated? It's within art. And this video you're watching is not a documentary. It's art. It's me creating a piece of art that you watch primarily, I hope, for entertainment. Although I can't imagine, wow, you know, me talking for like nearly an hour on this is entertaining. But more to the point is that I'm trying to do it on this channel, right? So if you can get as angry as you like, but believe me, I am not fixed in my opinion, all right? And I will respond a lot more to, you know, a kinder pushback, let us say, because there's somebody that I was arguing with, and it was an act of kindness. I can't remember who it was, but they said, "Go to bed, Andy. You're just, you know, this can't be doing you any good." And I went, "Yeah, it's killing me." Right? I thought I was strong. I thought I could take it. I thought I didn't care what people could call me a racist. They could call me a sexist, a misogynist, all the worst things, all the ists that you can be. Right nowadays, they were calling me as many as they could possibly get in. Right, and I've been called all sorts of things. You know, I've been called right-wing, alt-right mouthpiece of the alt-right, and also there's one guy that comes on and keeps saying that all I'm doing is pushing progressive liberal ideas down everybody's throat. You know, that's probably some racist that doesn't like me even celebrating the work of black people. That's the world we live in. That's the world we live in. Right? I hope. But this one guy said, he said, "Go to bed, Andy." And I went, "Yeah, this is killing me. It's killing us all. You know, it's killing us all." This music is moving into myth. It doesn't mean anything anymore. In 20, 30 years, it'll all be gone. I'll probably be gone. A lot of you will be gone. Their kids will be middle-aged. They'll have a vague idea of this in the same way as we have a vague idea of musicians like Ivan Novello. You know. Rudy Valley, you know, the biggest artists of the 1920s and the 1930s, but I can't even think of them, and I'm supposedly a music history lecturer and teacher, so I know they're there. You know, people were all buying Louis Armstrong records in the 1920s, were they? They were buying other stuff, people who sang down megaphones. I don't even know about it. Oh, do you want to see John Bonham's drumhead? There it is. But we don't know. It could be. It couldn't be. We'll never know because there's nobody there to come along and tell us. It's like Lord of the Rings. It's history. What becomes history becomes myth. What becomes myth becomes legend. And then what becomes legend eventually will just be cosmic dust. If you like this video, Philosophy Sunday, then please put a like on it. If you want to see more of this stuff, please subscribe. If you want to support me, and believe it right now, I'm now no longer employed. And I will talk about this as time goes on. This has been a big... it's affected this channel, and what I've been going through for the last couple of years has affected this channel deeply. And if you understand it, you will see it's in there. But I can't say much more at this point in time. But I am now out of my job, and I am a freelance musician, and I am earning my living partly through this channel, partly through my Patreon, and partly through bits of teaching and gigs, and it's hand to mouth, as you would expect. But if you do want to support me, I have a Patreon. The Patreon now has a WhatsApp group. It's all there. It's just kicked up the Patreon as, and I love it there. And I've been getting quite a bit of content in last week that was great. I did a long form video that looks at transactional analysis and applying that to procrastination, sort of thing that's not going to go down well here. But if you're a musician, that's a useful thing. I'll put some free albums up, and I put another video up. Can't even remember what the other video was now. Anyway, there's a whole ton of stuff, new stuff up there. So if you don't want to go on Patreon, but you still want to support me, now you've realised I'm in dire straits, another band that's massively overrated, then I have a PayPal, YouTube, tip jar PayPal thing. And believe me, that's dinners for my kids at the moment. See, YouTube, it's a begging bowl. YouTube is sensationalism. YouTube is here today, gone tomorrow. YouTube is a whole bunch of things. It just is what it is. I find it fascinating, and I think we're done now, aren't we? I'm going to go now. Bye. See you on the next one.
When a boy kisses a girl, he takes a trip around the world. Hey, hey. Mama said, when I kiss her lips, it never feel to her fingertip. Hey, hey. When a boy kisses a girl, he takes a trip